Welcome, welcome everyone to a very special bonus episode of the Runners Roundtable, where I am joined by Coach Becky Croft. I like to say that you're not my muse. That's not the right way to describe you, but you are someone that's been so pivotal to expanding my understanding of the running community and the different facets of the running community. So it's not so much you're amused, it's more like you're a guiding light for me within
Oh,
running. So I'm so excited to be able to share this time with you to talk with you about our running of this year's Chicago Marathon. And I don't know about you, but I'm still kind of riding the the high of that race and of being able to once again go from start line to finish line. So I want to start first by asking how you got into this race because the race does have different avenues, whether it's charity or lottery or legacy. So I figured we could start there. My entry was as a legacy runner because I've ran Chicago so many times in the past 10 years. I have an automatic guaranteed entry, but I'm not sure how you got into the race. So if you can share that, we can start there. Probably should start by having you introduce yourself now that I'm like, wait a minute.
yeah.
How about you
Yeah,
introduce
so
yourself first and then how you got into Chicago?
yeah, for those who have not experienced one of our podcasts together, my name is Becky Croft. I also am known as Coach. Sometimes I'm known as Damn It Coach, depending on what kind of workouts I've prescribed to my athletes. But I am a Game Changers coach and mentor certified through the RRCA. I am a She Runs This Town leader. I am a She Running instructor, and I am on the board of directors for Renew Earth Running. So, um, I joked recently at an event I spoke at and said I originally just set out to run a 5K, and running somehow became my entire identity. So, as far as Chicago is concerned, I actually got in through the lottery this time.
How many times
So
did you
I did.
apply for the lottery?
This was my first Chicago lottery application and experience.
So you
So
see,
Chicago is
the
one of the easier ones to get into.
I was going to say it works. The lottery works for Chicago. Chicago is known to be one of the easier ones to enter. So, can you just walk us through what your prep for Chicago was like?
So my prep this year was a little different than it would normally be because this was my third marathon of the year. I started out with a huge goal race of running Ventura Marathon in February. And so I put all my eggs into that basket. I had a really hard day and I didn't walk away with the outcome that I wanted, but it was still a very solid performance. Um, and then I got into the lottery for Chicago. So I was like, okay, 2 marathons a year is my max usually. So I thought there's 8 months between them. Like it's enough to give me a breather. I can go into this with like some solid training, have a solid experience. But when I was in the middle of my deload of Ventura, I had the opportunity to accept a bib to Boston. So that changed the course of my year quite a bit. I only had 6 weeks to plan for that.
So after Boston, so Ventura was in February.
Right. It was late February. Then I went into, I went right, I took a 1 week deload and then went right back into training, picking up kind of where I was. And I knew that coming off of Ventura that like I wasn't going to go out there and absolutely smash Boston. But again, I wanted to have a solid experience. For me, Boston was about so much more than the race itself other than it meant a lot for me to be there representing Native women running.
Yeah,
I
I was
maybe
going to
like,
ask you that. I was going to ask you, can you share why you were in Boston? I know why, but
so they were originally given a bib and had chose one of their leadership team to go, but then they were given a second bib and Verna was talking to the leadership team about it. Okay, who do we want to send? And they all asked for that she approached me. And so she had actually approached me about an opportunity through Rising Hearts before that. And I was like, oh no, Verda, I can't run 3 marathons this year. That just would wreck me. And so I was like, let somebody else go have that experience. But I did kind of toy with the idea when she presented it. So when she actually contacted me and said, hey, I would like to have a phone call. And she said, I want to talk to you about Boston. I thought that she was reaching out for somebody else. And so I said, we have 6 weeks. Like, that's a little bit much to ask of any of our sisters, but who do you have in mind? And she's like, no, 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 no. We want you. And I was like, okay, how can I not go?
So now that you have the experience of two marathon majors in 1 year, what are your big takeaways? Like how would you distinguish the two races from one another? Just that's like my curiosity.
So this was actually my third major, but my first one was Berlin in 2019.
Okay, yeah, I just meant this year. I'm like this year
Yeah.
because that's fresh. Like you're going
Yeah.
from April, you maybe take a little bit of time off, and then you're right back into the marathon training machine.
Yeah, it's a lot to ask of anyone's body, but it because Berlin was so far away, having two fresh perspectives definitely kind of brings some new things back up to the table that obviously, as you know, I deep dive into all things World Marathon Majors and the nuances of it. And, when everybody starts getting upset over Boston qualifying times and telling us to work harder if you really want to be there, I will call out the truth of the situation. There are many avenues to get to these races. I was very fortunate with Native Women Running and Boston, and I didn't have to fundraise to get there. I was fortunate with Chicago that I got in through the lottery. So I, again, didn't have to fundraise and go have a more stressful experience just making sure I got there. But um, I compare Boston and Chicago a lot because I've experienced both of them this year. And I will have to say that I think that the crowd support in Chicago rivaled Boston.
Yeah, listen, I'm very biased. I'm very biased. This was my seventh time running Chicago, and I find that every time I train for and run that race, it is an absolutely different experience. Like for me, this training cycle, I always struggle, and I know you can feel me on this with like training in the summer months for a
Yes.
fall marathon. It's really hot, and it doesn't matter how much I hype myself up and tell myself, like, you're gonna be okay. No, I always fall apart. Like mentally, I can't. I struggle with the heat, but this particular training cycle for me was um one of the most challenging training cycles I had ever experienced because my body just it was not optimal, did not feel well. I don't know if it's because of low iron levels or perimenopause or just life is the stress of life is feeling a little bit heavier, but it was one that I started the training cycle and I had no clue if I was even going to be able to run Chicago because I did not know if it would be the smartest thing for me to do physically with how poor I was feeling. I this training cycle, and it's been a really, really long time since I've done a training cycle where I did run walk for all of my runs because I needed the extra recovery time of those walk breaks to even get through my runs. And I had, I would say this is the first training cycle. I probably missed about 2 to 3 of my long runs because I was getting sick very frequently. Again, I'm like, is it iron? Is it perimenopause? Is there something else going on? Like, what could it possibly be? And I was not feeling very confident with my ability to do this race. And then thankfully, I had two 20-mile runs, and those I nailed them. And I nailed them. And when I say I nailed them, I just mean like I finished them and I was like, okay, I can do this. All those other runs, those 15, 16 milers, they absolutely they beat me up. Mentally, I struggled so bad on those that I had told myself I'm going to take it 1 week at a time, one run at a time. I'm going to go to Chicago either way, but I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm going to run this race. And I was even while I was in Chicago, I was kind of like going through the motions and I had which I hadn't shared, but I'll share it here now because I am starting to share it more with people. My dog died the Tuesday before the race, which was um very shocking and very unexpected. And I'm still processing it, and I feel like I don't it's at this point, I'm like, grief is a really funky thing because it's not only the grief of the loss of my dog, but it's also there's a lot of grief that comes with accomplishing a big goal, like
Yeah.
finishing Chicago and being like, oh wow, here's this thing that I have looked forward to and have done my best to work toward for the past, 4, 6 months of my life. And now it's done. And it's like, oh, and it's in people often hear talk of the marathon blues, but I'm like, yeah, part of the marathon blues is a grief. Like it's the grief of that phase and style of life ending.
Yeah.
And I went into Chicago again, like I went through the motions. I got my bib and I was like, maybe I'll run, maybe I won't run. Like I'm not kind of really sure what's the smartest thing to do. And I decided I was like, well, I am gonna run. I'm going to run. And as long as I am not connected to any particular outcome, then I can give myself the space to just show up and to feel whatever I need to feel while I'm out on that run. And that for me was probably the best approach because then I ended up having I would say one of the most incredible marathon experiences. I had one of my athletes texted me before the race and asked what corral I was in. And then she's like, can I run with you? And I was like, yeah, as long as you're okay with a run walk, we're going to do it. And we spent 26.2 miles together, run walking. And as we were going up Mount Roosevelt, I
Oh
was
my
like, okay,
gosh. Yes.
so yeah, I'm like, so same time next year. And I was like, who is this woman that like, I haven't even finished the marathon and I'm already thinking about like next year. And for me, that was probably the biggest win because I had not envisioned that for myself. I honestly envisioned me doing this race and probably struggling big time mentally. Like I left Miami and I was like I told my husband I'm like it's probably going to be like a mental disaster. Like I'm probably going to have a mental breakdown on that race because our dog died and just how challenging everything's been. And I didn't. So that to me was a very happy surprise out of that race.
Those are huge wins. And those are the things that I always encourage my athletes to sit with after they've had a big experience, regardless of what their outcome was. And honestly, we place such high value on our goals and these huge, audacious goals. We get so invested in them that if we don't hit them, we just absolutely fall apart. Oh, I could have done better. I could have done this. I could have done that. And, I've told people before, actually, stop shoulding all over yourself. I should
Mm-hmm.
be able to perform. I should be able to complete this. Because we never really know what race day is going to give us. Even like for me in Ventura, the fitness was there to reach my goal. The temperature was not.
Yeah.
It was not in my favor. Everything else was aligned. I was in a good place. And I knew by mile 14 that I just was starting to feel those little hints of things that were not going my way. And I fought through it for 5 miles. But then I said, that's it. No, just get through it. And so whether it be a smaller race or a Chicago, we never know what's going to be handed to us.
Yeah,
My
that
experience actually leading up to Chicago was a little different. Like I haven't marathon trained during the summer for a couple years. And so I was like, okay, I just go into a summer survival experience here. Go have a solid experience. This is your third marathon of the year. It's a major, it's your second major of the year. So there's a lot of stress that goes into this that we don't account for. But I was like, okay, I know these things, but I had a mostly solid experience throughout I had a couple long runs that workouts were a little too aggressive for the weather I was being handed. But overall, I didn't have to go to the chiropractor weekly or twice a week. I actually saw him once or twice for my back, but that's because I need a new bed. It wasn't because of my training. And so I had my own wins, but getting there and, the stress of the expo and all of the extra people and the energy that goes into it and like navigating the metro and things like that are things that athletes don't really think about. And so I went out there. I actually covered my watch with one of my stickers and it said, just run. And so, because I knew at least the first 5K, the GPS was going to be wacky, I didn't manually lap, which was great because I didn't even see the mile marker for mile one. I saw all of the other ones, but I just covered my watch and said, okay, run by feel. You know what your easy pace feels like. Pull it back, pull it back, pull it back. And then I fought through probably like the first half. And then I was like, just whatever, just get through it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really important to bring up, that the sheer amount of people that travel into town for this race. I mean, they had over 52,000 finishers for the marathon alone, right? Like that's not even including people who are doing the 5K. It's not including family members who are coming out to support. It's not including people in the community who are going out to the expo because the expo is open to everyone, right? So it is totally different experience when you're talking about, I don't know how many people do Ventura, but it's like, you're at Expo, there were long lines for everything and you're on your feet a lot while you're in Expo. And when you race morning, it's the same thing. You're arriving, I think they recommend you arrive, it's like almost like 2 hours before you're set to start. So it's a lot of time that you're on your feet. I mean, the benefit is that with Chicago, the start area, it's there. Like if you're in the city or you're close enough to where the start area is, it's a very accessible start area. So once you're through, you're through. You can sit down, you can wait in the line for the porta potty. Like there's space. It's not like other races that you've got to that there's a big gap. At least for me with Chicago, I think I woke up, maybe my alarm was set for 5 a.m. and I started running a little bit after 8. So all things considered, it's like that's not a bad gap between waking up and starting your race when you're walking over. Like I think we ended up probably, yeah, I feel like we left the Airbnb like around 6:15-ish.
Yeah, that's
So
about the time that I left as well.
so I find that that's like a perk of the race. Like that's one of my favorite parts about the race is that to get to the start area, it is pretty accessible and it is pretty easy to get there. Did you have that same experience race morning?
Yeah, so I chose an Airbnb that was as close as I could get to the start without it being $6,000.
Yeah.
But I didn't even realize that we were actually on course. So we were about mile 16. Our balcony overlooked the course. And so we hopped on the metro. My husband and one of my really good friends went with me. And I was like, you guys are taking me to the start, right? Like, I need you to get me there so I don't stress any more than I already am.
Yep.
But I was only 3 miles away from the start. And what I loved about it is that it was so accessible. Like, they got me to the gate. And then as soon as I walked through the gate, like, I was right there. And I didn't have to stress about where do I go? What do I do? I just went in there. I bought some throwaway clothes. So even though it wasn't that cold, like at
Yep.
least it kept me warm while I sat there. And I just sat on the ground and waited until the start. So I was there probably an hour-ish, hour and a half before, but it goes by so fast that you don't realize that. And the
Yeah.
difference between Chicago and Boston, with Boston being a point to point, we were bussed out to the start. So you've got an hour to sit on the bus to get out there, and then you have to go through the waiting of the porta potty lines and to be released to go walk towards the start. And and so Boston, I didn't start until 11:30, but in Chicago, I started, right the gate right in front of you. So
Yeah,
it was,
that's also one of the things that I like about Chicago is that it does start early enough in the morning. Like some of the other marathon majors start a little bit later. And that again, like the between waking up and starting to run, like that gap, that plays that plays a big role in terms of what's your nutrition on race day. How are you, how are you warming up? Just how are you warming up your body, your stomach, your mind before an event? That was something that with New York City when I did it, like that for me is the number one reason why I would never do that race again. And I know a lot of people love that race. But it's the logistics of the start line. I remember getting on a bus at 5 and arriving in Staten Island at 6 and waiting around until 10:30 for me
Yeah.
to start running. And it was such a long time. And that for me, that year I did it, it was cold and it ended up being colder than what they thought it would be. So I just remember walking around the start area to try to warm up. So that's like for me, I'm like, it's a great race, but not for me.
I've
And
thought about that too. I haven't done New York yet, but it's obviously on my list, especially since I'm halfway through the series now. And I mean, I was there last year supporting because I had three on roster and three of my Native women running that were
mhm,
there participating. But they had to go get on a ferry or get to the start and sit there for like 5 hours before they could
yep,
even start running. And nobody really thinks about that stress and how it truly impacts your experience.
it really does. So I believe you were in G, right? That was your corral. You were in G and I was behind you in H. How was your experience getting into the corral? Did you get there early enough that you weren't like, I know for me, I felt like cattle just waiting outside to get into the corral. And then once we were in the corral, I mean, there was no space at all. I cannot believe how many people they fit into one corral. Was that the same for you?
When I got there initially, there were two entrances to each of the corrals. So I felt like it was super easy for me to walk in. And again, I had my throwaway clothes on. So I just lifted up my shirt to show my bib. They let me in and I went and sat down. And it was pretty open initially. But the closer that it got to start, the more that it started just absolutely pack. And by the time we got to the point where we were walking to the start, yeah, we were just like waddling through there like penguins.
Yeah. What did you think about the course itself?
Um, I saw it beforehand and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of turns. And what I don't love is that it's out and back, it's out and back, it's out and back. So I don't love like loop courses or a lot of out and backs because I get bored with them normally. And
Yeah.
that wasn't the case in Chicago because it's so busy. There's so much energy. There were 1.5 million supporters on course. So, yes, on top of our 52,000 participants, which is the largest field that Chicago's ever had, we had an insane amount of support out there. So that kept me entertained and looking at the signs and navigating the aid stations and things like that. I think that as far as organized chaos goes, it's very well put together.
Yeah,
But all those turns, I was like, this is a lot.
I can't even listen, I think I spent the first half of the race not I feel like I wasn't even processing that I was running a marathon. And I
Yeah.
knew kind of where I was because I've ran the race before. Like I knew at what point we were going back to that 13.1, like halfway downtown bit. But I would say the first like 10 miles of the race, I didn't even notice the kilometer signs. I didn't notice the mileage signs. And it was because the crowds were so incredible. I mean, the crowds were out there, the signs were out there, like all of it was just amazing. And I mean, the weather participated. The weather contributed to it because I think it was a really, really nice day for people to come out to spectate. As a
Yeah.
runner, for me, it was a little hot. Like it still got a little bit hot. There were points where the sun came out and I was like, oh, this is a little spicy. There were two Martin stops on the course, and I know by the time I reached the first one, they were actually all out of gels. Did you have gels? Were there gels at that first Martin stop
Yeah,
or Morton?
Yeah, I don't like the Morton gels, so I don't
Yeah.
use them. I carry all of my own, but I do pay attention to that, obviously. And they were telling you either caffeinated or the
Hmm.
non-caffeinated. And I think the second aid station, I noticed that they were either pulling them off of the ground where they had dropped them, or they were pulling them out of boxes. So they weren't able to stay on top of it as quickly as I'm sure they wanted to.
Yeah. I remember asking my running partner, I'm like, or she asked me, I don't know, I don't remember, but we were like, are people taking more than one gel? Like, why are there no gels here? Like, what's going on? So that
So many
was,
people train with them too, so I wouldn't be surprised if they were taking multiple.
yeah, it had to have been that because when we got to that first one where they were supposed to be available, there weren't any. There were at the second one. So we both grabbed and we're like, just in case we need for later. Like, it's not usually what we have, but just in
Yeah.
case we need for later. Uh, since we're talking about that, how would you rate your fueling strategy for the race?
I honestly had a hard time staying on top of it. And I've noticed this about myself when I'm in these big races or efforts, it gets increasingly harder for me to actually tolerate my gels.
Mm-hmm.
That is normally by mile 20 to 24, though. In Chicago, it was about mile 12. I started backing off of them because I was like, I'm just not tolerating these well. So I'm going to back off of it a little bit. I started taking water at some of the stations. I still had my tailwind in my bottle, so I still
Yeah.
had fuel that I was taking in, but a little more gentle on my stomach. And then I came up on mile 16 and they were handing out mimosas, and I was like, no, 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 no. Oh, okay, I'll take that at the last second. And honestly, I mean, aside from the champagne, and I think that the orange juice really gave me a nice boost of the sugar that I needed because I wasn't staying on top of it.
Yeah, I found that it's interesting you say that because I had the same experience where I was really on top of it the first half of the race, and then it was probably like around mile 15, mile between mile 15 and mile 16 when I was supposed to take a gel. I couldn't. I was like, I feel so full right now that
Yeah.
I think taking a gel is gonna it's I'm either gonna vomit or I'm gonna poop on myself. Like one or the other. It's gonna come out one way. So I backed off. Like I would say those middle miles up until like 20 more or less. I didn't have a gel. I did in Pilsen, I did grab a Gatorade from someone, so a little blue bottle of Gatorade, and that I drank that. That felt great. And after that, I felt a little bit. I felt more ready to take in some kind of fuel, but I feel you on that. And my brain started to spiral of like, but if I don't have the gel and I've practiced this and I've done this, and it's kind of it's for me and always it's like a reminder of you got to meet your body where it's at. And if taking the gel is going to do more harm than good, just back off for a little bit.
Just
Like
cut it
you
off.
can, yeah, you can always come back to it. Like you really can. You can give yourself just keep moving forward and then keep checking in with yourself to see if you need that. How did you feel about that Mount Rosemont or Mount Roosevelt? Why do I want to call it Rosemont? Mount Roosevelt. I keep wanting to call it Rosemont. Roosevelt at the end. Was that like
Well,
a big deal for you? Because people always make a big deal. So I'm just curious how it felt in your body.
Well, by that time, I actually almost went down on course twice. So the first time was about mile 5. Me and somebody else almost went down at the same time. So there was like an unmarked speed bump or an irregularity in the road, something, but I caught myself on a guy and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm upright." That's all that matters right now. But it happened again around mile probably somewhere between 18 and 20, but it,
Wow.
it hurt my toenails. So I like really stumbled and almost went down, but I was able to pull myself back up. And it was just, I hit something in the road wrong. So the potholes and the speed bumps, or, I mean, we're running on the roads. So
Yeah.
if they're unmarked, your head is usually up, but my head spent more time down than normal, especially navigating the aid stations, which I felt were more slippery and then sticky than most of the other races that I've done. And so by the time I got to Mount Roosevelt, I was like, I ran half of it and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this is a thing.
This is
So I
where
walked
everyone
like
freaks out.
I walked just a little bit of it and then I turned my head and I saw that we were turning and I saw the finish and I just went. I was like, okay, I've got it. And I started passing people and weaving and I was like, head down, go. We're done. We're done.
How did it feel to finish?
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, as soon as you see that finish line, you get emotional. And I did the same thing in Boston. That's the beauty of these two races is you turn left and then you see the finish and you're like, oh my gosh. At least in Chicago, it's right there. Now in Boston, you've got you can see it down there, but you've got
Yeah.
further to go.
Yeah, that is, I mean, you earn that finish. Like not only do you earn that finish just because you're running 26 miles before getting there, right? Because it's like that climb, I think it starts when you have like point 0.2 left. So
Yeah,
it is really right at the end. You're climbing and then you go a little bit down into the finish line, but it is like, when they say the view at the top of the hill is worth it, that is 100% true of this race because once you finish that climb, and you start to turn left, it is. It's just the finish. You see the
it's
finish.
just like,
It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Did you, by any chance, partake in the Goose Island beer at the finish, like the runner's
yeah.
special brew?
I did, and it was, I think, a wheat, which is something I normally don't drink. So I probably drank about a third of a can, and then I threw the rest of it away.
Yeah.
Um, I did also find the mini donuts, which were fantastic.
Yeah.
I was very excited about the donuts.
Yeah. I have, let me see if I can get it here because I did bring it home, right? So this
Oh,
is the
nice. Yes.
I heard some people weren't able to leave with it. And I'm like, oh no, I collect these. Every Chicago I've done that they've had these custom beers for the race, I've collected them. So yeah, it was like a watermelon wheat ale or something or other. Yeah, I mean, I drank it because it's for me, it was more like of a ritual. I finished and I was like, I'm full. Like my tummy is okay. But I was like, I have to drink it. This is my celebration drink. This is my ritual at the end of the race. So I have it. Apparently, I snuck it in my bag and took it out. I know some people weren't able to take it. So it came home with me. How was your post race? Like, did you stick around afterwards? Did you go to the family reunion slash post race celebration? Or did you just go straight to your Airbnb?
So I actually did hobble down through there a little bit. I took a couple pictures with my medal, and that was something that after Boston, I normally take a selfie with my medal, and after Boston, I didn't do my typical selfie, but I did have photos of me standing with the finish line behind me and stuff. So I was like, oh yeah, I need to take my selfie. So I did take some pictures, and then I wandered over towards the fountain, but my husband was calling me. They were trying to get to me and
Yeah.
they couldn't come into that area. So I was like, hold on, I'm going to go take a picture by the fountain and then I'll come out and find you. And so I went over there and I asked some kind lady to be my photographer for me. And then I went out and found my husband and my friend, but they were like over by the start area close to the gates. So I went and reunited with them. And then I asked them if we could go down to the Millennium Park because I wanted to take my picture with the bean.
Yeah.
And so we took a couple pictures there, but then we went back and got cleaned up and let me settle down and get into my squeezy boots for a little bit before we went and had pizza.
Yeah, that is so for people who don't know, right? Like you do this race and the start area and the finish area are in your it's not the exact same start and finish, but it is the same area. So where you do gear check, Buckingham Fountain, like that is you have access to it before and after the race, but only runners have access to that. You can go to Buckingham Fountain, and that's usually where I love going there and hanging out a little bit afterwards because people are like sitting down and just hanging out, taking photos, and your fellow runners are very, very, very kind when it comes to taking pictures. So like I had two other people. I offered to take someone's picture and then someone offered to take my picture. And I'm like, this is beautiful. We are all just taking each other's pictures. But you go there, there's gear check. And then from there, yeah, you do have to walk outside to Grant Park in order to reunite with family and friends. I didn't really catch if there was music this year, but there is a stage where they do have musicians. There's the beer garden, there's all that stuff. I didn't spend too much time there. I found one friend and then I was like, I need to go home and shower. Like I really wanted to shower. But I had, I mean, finishing a marathon is I hope that people who listen to this know that finishing a marathon is more than your finish time. That every time you cross a finish line, it is an accomplishment, regardless of what you had plans. Like it's 26.2 miles is no joke. And that distance can beat you up. It can lift you up. It can break you down. It can revive you. Like that, I always say 26.2 is a really long time for a lot of things to happen. So for
Yeah.
me, I crossed the finish line and I always cry. Like at finish lines, I always cry and I'm crying and I love it because I had someone someone caught the video of me finishing with my running partner and I finished and I just turned to her and I hugged her and I started crying and it's just like it's this video of us hugging and me crying and then we pull apart and she's like we can turn off our garments now and I'm like oh yeah you're right so if you see the video it just cracks me up because it's like we're hugging and then we break apart and you see both of us like turn off our watches and that was to me I'm like oh the marathons take everything out of you like they physically they take everything out of you emotionally they take everything out of you mentally they take everything out of you I mean when you're out there you're making constant decisions that are helping you move forward, right? Like it's constant, regardless of whether you're doing that for 2 hours, for 7 hours, for 5 hours, whatever the case is. Like your brain, your body, and your feelings are constantly on.
Yeah.
So I know for me, when I finished, it was relief, like relief of holy shit, I did it. Like I did it. I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I feel like I always start these races with like I know I can do it, but I have no clue what it's going to take to get there.
Yeah. I would agree. They can be incredibly healing as well. For me, being Indigenous, I was out there in my ribbon skirt. I had posted it, my lay flat beforehand, just my skirt and my bib and my shoes. And I was, or no, I did my whole outfit this time. Um, and so somebody on Threads, I think, actually was like, "I saw you on the course," and somebody else was like, "Oh, I saw you from behind, but I didn't know if it was you." And so, I spent a lot of time thinking about my fellow Indigenous athletes who were there because NWR took 4 this year. And so I wrote plans for them so that they could have a solid experience. And they were out there in their ribbon skirts and, they were doing their own thing, but we were all on the course being seen and healing parts of ourselves and our ancestors that we carry along with us. And so I spent a lot of time because for me, post hysterectomy, being Indigenous, being a marathoner in surgical menopause, I'm an outlier. And I actually had that tattooed on my wrist this year,
Outlier.
right before my birthday, with a feather. So I spent a lot of time telling myself it was okay to feel my feelings, like I'm safe. I am safe to feel them, to process them, and to release them. So it was healing for me to be able to go and do this. And like I said, it was my third marathon this year and my second major. And I came away from this year looking at at the statistics of how many women are like me out there and there aren't. But me being able to see myself as an outlier in a good way rather than it being something that is wrong or different or looked down upon or privilege being a bad thing that I can go out there and do this. I've tapped into that strength because of the marathon.
Yeah, and right, you're an outlier because you're paving the way.
Yeah.
Can you just real quick, can you tell us a little bit more about the ribbon skirt? So just what's the reasoning behind it? And for you, what's the significance for people who don't know?
Yeah, so ribbon skirts are traditionally long, like down to your ankles, but the one that I wear is short, and I actually have two of them. The running ribbon skirt is a little more functional for us to be able to go out there and complete races and stuff. Um, but they're traditionally sacred and saved for ceremonial experiences, very special experiences.
Mm,
Ribbons can mean different, the colors can mean different things for different tribes. The one that I ran in this time, one of my athletes made for me, I asked her to do that as I started having opportunities to be on panels at race expos with my game changers. So when I go on one of these panels, I wear my ribbon skirt. I don't mention it, I just go wear it. Um, Most people don't really know what it is. They just think it's cute, whatever.
yeah.
But for me, it was really important that she make it for me because she's Indigenous. And so I actually came away from the panel in DC before Cherry Blossom, and I got a message from somebody who complimented me on it and knew what it was. And I was like, oh my gosh, that means everything.
Yeah.
But then I had a special one in Boston. Marlinda and I, the other Indigenous athlete, we had matching skirts that were made for us by, again, another Indigenous woman who put so much love and effort into it, and it's so beautiful. So we chose our color ribbons and things like that, and so we had the opportunity to go out there and represent in our culture in this space.
Yeah. So speaking of that, what are, so obviously I am not Indigenous and I view this race through the lens of Stephanie Diaz's mind, right? Of like, this is the healing journey that I'm going on as a runner is very much so for me, right? It's the I started running marathons because I was curious as to what I could do. So
Yeah.
for me, the marathon, it's a transformation of self, and it is something that reminds me of my strength. So it is for me very, very personal. But listening to what you're saying, it is as you're running, yes, you're running, you are the one that's running. And in many ways, it sounds like it is for you, but also it seems like it's a part of the legacy. And it is a part of not only honoring the past, but building a future in which more women like you are taking up space, are seen. So what are some of the things about running a race, particularly like Chicago, that an indigenous athlete would notice that maybe the rest of us don't notice, or that the rest of us should do a better job at noticing?
Well, so I will ask you this, since you have a non-Indigenous perspective and had a different experience, do you know the traditional homelands of the space that you raced on?
No, and I was going to say, I know you're going to ask me that question. I knew it was coming because you, in one of your posts, you acknowledged it, and I know that's something I've heard from, I believe, you and other Indigenous runners, like an ask from race organizers to just to acknowledge the lands that they're on. So I would say for me, no, I'm in Chicago, and I don't even know what the word Chicago means, right? Like, and the roots of it are probably they probably are indigenous. So yeah, that my answer is no, no clue.
So, from an Indigenous lens, I did do some research on whose lands that I was racing upon, and on Medal Monday, yeah, I posted my photo in front of the bean, but I didn't give a race recap. I didn't give my time. I didn't say, "Oh, no PR this time." That wasn't even truly my goal. Would I have liked it? Yes, absolutely, because running is so many things for me, but I actually did give the land acknowledgement because even though Chicago provided bibs to Native women running and did not make them pay for it, or now every race is different. They actually, like, they had to pay for my bib in Boston, but They didn't have to in Chicago. And I don't know what the setup is with New York, but each one of these majors has their own set of rules, their own way that they accommodate. And they are building a relationship with Verna, at least Chicago is. She's starting to build more relationships through the community so that more women have the opportunity. But Turtle Island, or as we know it, the United States of America, is indigenous. The original stewards of these lands are indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, however you want to refer to them. I prefer to use either Native or Indigenous interchangeably. You won't often find me saying Native American anymore.
Mm.
As I decolonize myself, I kind of am removing myself from some of that. Now, again, I'm an Indigenous woman living in a modern world who doesn't have super strong ties to her tribe, to her culture, to her language, things like that. So it's a coming home to me. So it's kind of hard, but I think it's really important that future generations understand who originally took care of these lands and who can continue to take care of these lands.
Yeah, listen, that's again like a very different lens from what I view it as in terms of I show up, I expect I expect that the volunteers and race organizers and that there's going to be people that are going to come and clean up the course. Like that to me, it's not it's like not even on my radar because I am so focused on myself. And yet I'm going to assume it took you like less than 5 minutes to do the research of whose lands that was on. There's what the native.la, I believe is that
Yeah,
the website?
there's there's a native land map, but I mean, Chat GPT can be used for so many things. Whose lands am I on? Who were the original stewards of these lands? And so, me being on the board of directors for Renew Earth Running, this is our mission. Our tagline is Legs for Land Back. And the goal is running as a form of advocacy for returning stewardship to Indigenous peoples. So, this is obviously something that's always on my radar, or I'm going to speak about, or I'm going to share, and I'm going to share those resources. And I'm happy to do so so that more people are educated about it.
So with that in mind, what could the Chicago Marathon do differently next year to honor that?
At the absolute minimum, and I do really want to emphasize that it's minimum, is give a land back or like a land acknowledgement and recognize the tribes that were originally inhabited of that area. But they can continue fostering a relationship with NWR and with other Indigenous organizations. It's not just running. I mean, there's Native Women ride and Native Women hike. Like natives are out there doing all the things, and they're on the trails, but they don't feel welcome there. And so,
Mm.
fostering those relationships and just including them more without letting egos get in the way or feeling threatened by including people who don't look like them. It's time that people start expanding their lens.
Yeah, and I think of it in terms of like race morning, right? You can make an announcement. Not everyone may hear that announcement, but even if it's like you do the participant guide, right? Like, and in the participant guide, in the race director, it's usually in the participant guide. Like, one of the first few pages will be a note from the race director, and even having it in there, or having again like a panel at Expo talking about it as well, right? Like, those are all small things that people can do that will help break, people like me and then some people that are even worse out of that me bubble of the race of like, hey, yes, we are all here, which is so funny because it's like it's 52,000 people running. So even though it is an individual thing, it is still very much so a collective experience. And we are all running through these streets together.
Well, and like you brought up, actually NWR did have a panel at the expo.
Oh, they did.
Yes. But I mean, with all of the hype around the expo, it can get lost very easily. So I would like to see more of that highlighted. Or, hey, how about you post pictures of just the Indigenous athletes that showed up?
Yeah, I would have loved that because I'm like, wait, I didn't even know. And I mean, honestly, I didn't even There was so much going on that Friday. I really didn't even fully register what panels or what events were going on in the main stage. And also, I don't recall them announcing anything at Expo where it's like, hey, 2 p.m., this panel is speaking, something like for people who
Yeah.
are there just walking around, you never know who's going to want to stick around to see anything. So,
That
yeah,
expo was absolute chaos.
it was madness. It was madness. Okay. So I want to know from, I have like 2 or 3 questions left, and we can both kind of go on there, go back and forth. So, question number one is, what is your biggest takeaway from this race experience?
Um, I think that Abbott has more than accomplished their goal of like hyping up these marathons. And I think it's time for them to spend some more time with diversity and stop fighting it, honestly. But I really did. I had a great experience. I enjoyed it. I'm not necessarily, honestly, one of those people who wants to be a legacy marathoner at any one of these races. I want to go have the experience and then I want to move on. Um, I'm not saying that I wouldn't go back to Boston, Chicago, Berlin, but I don't necessarily need to unless it's the right opportunity.
I love that. I am the opposite. I cannot wait to go back. I've ran it 7 times. But it's also when I think of Chicago, I think back to that woman from 2014 who was training for her first marathon. And I was very, very lucky that I did training for my first marathon while living in Chicago. So that lakefront trail, that was my home. And that I credit my time in Chicago with being the time that I fell in love with running, like truly, like madly, deeply, stupidly fell in love with running. So every time I go to Chicago, there's my heart is there. Like physically, I'm in Miami, Florida, but when I go back to Chicago, like that space feels more like home to me. And so for me going back, it's like I am running these streets that I did fall in love with. I'm running in a city that did nurture me very early on as a runner. So my biggest takeaway was that the race is it doesn't matter what race experience I have. I'm always going to want to go back. I've had my best race experiences there, my worst race experiences there, and I still want to do it. So that's my takeaway has been that Chicago as a city for me delivered on a race experience that does it does remind you that people love to support marathoners. As much
They
as we like to talk about being marathoners, people also love to support us.
That is the beauty of the majors is even in Berlin, there was a lot of support. There were, and the bibs are huge. And in Berlin, my name was on it. So everybody was yelling, "Go, Rebecca." And I'm like dying because it was pouring on us. It was cold. I'm on my feet for 5 hours and I'm like, "You don't know me."
Yeah,
But it's so hard to slow down and it's so hard to not have fun at places like Boston and Chicago with all of that support. That really is phenomenal that people are out there cheering you on. They're taking the time out of their day to stand there with signs or cowbells, and their kids are out there and their dogs are out there with them. And like they really do. You would think that you would go into these cities and they'd be like, "Oh my God, you're shutting down our streets." And
no,
how dare you? Because they do that in Tulsa with Route 66. Oh, they're very entitled here. And they're like, "How dare you do this every year?" But the tourism that it brings in is very helpful for their city. But when I've been in Boston, Chicago, Berlin, like they truly do celebrate you.
yeah. Okay. This one is more of like run coaching hat on. If you have an
Yeah.
athlete that comes to you asking you about Chicago, whether or not that is a race they should do, or what, just in general, like as a run coach, how do you view Chicago as a race for future marathoners?
So I don't tell my athletes this, and I did have one actually who lives in Chicago, and he has been running for decades, but this was like his first marathon, first major, first experience with that type of situation. I don't tell them, but I would suggest you don't try to race them, honestly. The smallest field is Boston with 30,000. The largest, I mean, we're at 52. I think New York wants to top that with like 54 or something.
Mhm.
But these other races are somewhere in the ballpark of 50,000 people. And the visual that I come away with from Boston and Chicago is when I am on a hill getting ready to dip and I see that later on the course moves up, it's nothing but a sea of people at
Mhm.
all times. There are not pockets where there's one or two runners. And I saw this in New York when I was cheering my athletes, and I was in the finish line area. I had a VIP pass to the grandstands, and I got that from my husband and my friend this year, but they were shocked by it. And I'm like, it's just a solid stream of people finishing
Mhm.
for like 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, you have to be very strategic with how you're going to race Chicago if you're racing Chicago, because there is a very big difference in course experience if you're in B corral versus being in J corral.
Yeah.
So that's for me as a run coach, it's always that. Like I always tell people, I'm like, I think it's a great race, but we have to know that it's people are going to have different experiences based off of where they are on that course.
I don't
So
ever want to discourage them from going and trying because they could have an incredible day. They could have a huge
yeah.
PR. You never know what they're being given either. So I don't ever tell them, but when they come away from it, one of my athletes, she was like, I'm trying to figure out what went wrong. Because again, like me and Ventura, this is what Chicago was for her. She's a
Mhm.
triathlete. She had a hysterectomy at the beginning of this year.
Oh,
And then she got sick. And so this has been like as we were getting ready to move into coaching, she already kind of started out struggling a little bit, but
yeah.
she came away going, I don't understand what happened. I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm like, you raced a major and
Yeah.
you took your family and you did some sightseeing, and there were 52,000 people there, and it was a warm day, and it was what we were handed. And it's not because your fitness is not there, because it absolutely is. And then I told her, I don't always suggest trying to race a major, but I don't ever want to plant a seed of doubt in
Yeah.
their mind.
Yeah.
I
If
don't.
you can do it, you can do it, right? Okay, the final question I have is just it's the simple one. It's the tell us where to find you. Where can we learn more about you? What do you got coming up? Like just give us a final rundown on Becky, where she's at and where she's going.
So, like I said, coming out of 3 marathons this year, all of them were sub fives, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I did not get injured in the process. I'm proud that I did not have to rely on my chiropractor and like give
Yeah.
him a mortgage payment every month. Um, I am going to pull back because I'm a huge supporter of periodizing your training. So for me, that
Mhm.
looks like doing some shorter stuff for a while. I don't have any major races on the calendar, but that is always subject to change because of my game changers, because of renew, because of, opportunities that pop up. Um, I've got a 5K to return to running this weekend. But I'm just going to take it chill and work on some other areas of weakness for a little bit. As far as finding me, I am heavily active on Instagram at coach.croft. And you can also find me on Facebook and threads there and the same handle, but most active on Instagram. I haven't really fully decided what I want to do with threads, so it's a little
Yeah.
a little chaotic, and I either have a good or a really terrible experience there. So
One or the other. Awesome. Well, Becky, thank you so much for joining me and talking about Chicago and educating us on your view as an Indigenous runner. And then also that little bit of tidbit at the end of like run coaching, how you would approach it. I really, really appreciate it. Y'all, thank you for joining us and listening. And if you ran Chicago, we would both love to hear about it, hear about your experience. And yeah, if you're interested in coaching too, hit us both up and we will
yeah.
help you with that. So Thank you so much for joining us, Becky. Any final words for us?
No, just thank you for having me and for expanding these conversations. I appreciate it.
Always, always. All right. Bye, everybody.